Friends, I would like to share with you an interesting interview with the head of the Alternative for Germany party, Alice Weidel, who criticized the German authorities for their confrontational policy towards Russia. In particular, she touched upon Friedrich Merz, who is called the main contender for the post of federal chancellor following the upcoming elections in Germany. Weidel said that if Merz becomes chancellor, he will be the chancellor of war, as he advocates increasing pressure on Russia, as well as transferring the famous terrorist missiles to someone you already guess. This is a step that Scholz has not yet decided to take, and here it is worth paying tribute at least to the fact that someone understands the consequences of such a step. According to Weidel, if Germany hands over these missiles, then the first strike by Russian missiles will be inflicted not on the capital of a well-known country, but on Berlin. Weidel stressed that Putin's underestimation of red lines is a gross strategic mistake. In general, friends, get ready to hear the curious arguments of Alice Weidel, and I will also share with you my thoughts on what is happening in Germany and around the conflicts in Eastern Europe. In the run-up to the German federal elections, the political landscape is becoming increasingly surreal. The political forces are frantically trying to figure out what the voters want and are rushing like flies in a jar, reviewing their statements. Faith in the stability of the political elite is melting like a snowflake in a hot frying pan. Germans are struggling to pay their electricity bills and are asking a reasonable question. Isn't it time for their leaders to think about acting more rationally rather than following utopian ideas? Here's the first absurdity: record imports of nuclear energy in 2024. Germany, which proudly abandoned its nuclear power plants in 2022, now buys 40 billion kilowatt-hours of nuclear electricity from neighbors France, Belgium, and Switzerland. For comparison, the last 3 German nuclear power plants produced about 32 billion kilowatt-hours. It's like giving up your own vegetable garden in favor of buying carrots from a neighbor, while convincing everyone that growing carrots at home is barbaric. Experts note that such a policy is not only illogical, but also economically harmful, since the cost of imported electricity is higher than the cost of its production within the country. The head of the RV energy company recently said that Germany miraculously avoided massive power outages in November, and January, he said, could be a real test. The problem is that solar and wind energy, which the government relies on so much, does not provide reliable energy supply in winter. Analysts warn that dependence on imports, especially in critical conditions, makes the country vulnerable. France, of course, will help, but its resources are also not unlimited, comments energy expert Hans-Peter Wolf. And if France suddenly fails, the Germans are waiting for romantic candlelit evenings, which, however, are unlikely to warm them. Meanwhile, Olaf Scholz continues to assure voters that his government is doing everything possible to support the famous country in its struggle. In one of the podcasts, he stated that he did not want to sacrifice the welfare of the Germans, but the circumstances were such that there was no other way out. It sounds like an excuse designed for an electorate with a short memory. Experts note that Scholz skillfully avoids words about the victory of a well-known country, limiting himself to statements that she will not be left alone. This gives the impression that the Chancellor himself does not believe in victory, but is forced to maintain the illusion of success for the sake of the election campaign. But things are not so smooth inside the country either. But this is just the beginning. Friends, just listen to this. Christian Lindner, known for his sarcastic remarks, attacked Friedrich Merz, saying that supporting Robert Habeck as Minister of Economy is the way to nowhere. Lindner, however, did not forget to remind that German politicians should take an example from American businessmen who rely on innovation, not ideology. We see that Javier Milei and Elon Musk are not only inspiring but also achieving real results, and what is Habeck doing? Plunges the country into an economic crisis, comments political scientist Marcus Streicher. Germany's energy and economic policy is perplexing even to the Germans themselves. For example, BMW, unlike Mercedes and Volkswagen, is in no hurry to completely leave the Russian market. The company has stopped assembling cars in Kaliningrad, but continues to issue loans for used cars through its bank. BMW Bank's profit growth for 2023 was 41%. Analysts suggest that the company expects to return to the Russian market as soon as the geopolitical situation stabilizes. There is no ideology, only business, says economist Thomas Geiger sarcastically. Looking at all this, it seems that German politicians and businessmen live in different realities. While the former are eagerly promoting their environmental initiatives, the latter are trying to minimize losses and adapt to new conditions. But how long will it be possible to maintain this delicate balance? Experts warn that if Germany does not reconsider its approaches to energy and the economy, it will face even more crises, and citizens' trust in the government will continue to fall. The political and economic chaos in Germany is becoming the perfect backdrop for an election campaign. Politicians compete in the art of demagoguery, businessmen are looking for ways to circumvent sanctions, and ordinary Germans are preparing for a new winter in conditions of energy instability. One can only guess what other surprises 2024 will bring for a country that was once a symbol of stability and prosperity. And now, friends, let's listen to Alice Weidel's speech about Russia and the situation around the famous conflict. Quote from the presenter: Bjorn Ecke said that if he had become chancellor, he would have gone to Moscow first. Why? Who, in your opinion, is Germany's main ally first of all? Alice Weidel responds: It depends only on Washington and Moscow. Accordingly, my first trips would be to these two cities, since peace there can only be achieved in cooperation with the United States and Russia. What role, in your opinion, is assigned to a famous country? Shouldn't she play a leading role in the peace process? The presenter clarifies. Alice Weidel's answer: I believe that this country has largely lost the ability to make decisions on its own. Everything is being decided in Washington. The parties must come to an agreement, taking into account the interests of both a well-known country and Russia. However, most often in discussions they forget that famous people also want peace. We must stop the senseless sacrifices. History shows that any conflict eventually comes to an end. Therefore, it is necessary to end this conflict as soon as possible, and not push it to further escalation, as Friedrich Merz does, threatening to supply Taurus missiles. Such actions will make Germany a party to the conflict and put us in immediate danger. The first rocket from Russia will fly not to the capital of a famous country, but to Berlin. That is why there should be no chancellor of war Friedrich Merz. Everyone wants peace, but how to achieve it? For example, you call Russia's actions a violation of international law, but at the same time you oppose financial and military assistance to a well-known country. Doesn't this mean that Russia will succeed in its conflict? The presenter asks a clarifying question. We are not only against the supply of weapons, but also against the deployment of German soldiers. Friedrich Merz, on the contrary, holds the opposite opinion, but such actions will not lead to the end of the conflict. Both sides need to sit down at the negotiating table. Friedrich Merz did not say that German soldiers should be sent. It is not true. The delivery of Taurus missiles involves the use of German soldiers, as well as the deployment of German soldiers on the territory of a well-known country, which is a red line for Russia. Now I would like to return to your vision of Russia as a reliable partner. Why do you consider Russia such a partner? We are betting not only on Moscow, but also on Washington. For example, I have always supported Donald Trump, despite criticism from the German media. In my opinion, he is an important partner for Germany, which was rejected by previous governments. Today, Germany is more popular than ever in the world. We are disliked neither in France, nor in Poland, nor in China, nor in the USA. This is the result of a failed foreign policy, for which Annalena Baerbock is responsible. Let's also return to the issue of military service. Your party manifesto talked about the resumption of compulsory military service, but this is no longer in the draft election program. Why didn't you manage to defend this position? The draft program has not yet been adopted. The decision will be made at the party congress. I understand the fears of my colleagues that the return of compulsory service may lead to the sending of German soldiers to a well-known country, which causes great concern. You also advocate Germany's withdrawal from the EU, but research shows that Brexit cost the UK 6% of GDP. How can you relate this to your position? It all depends on the period that is taken for analysis. We have other data showing that the losses were minimal. The end of Alice Weidel's speech. Europe, as always, is full of ideas, especially when it comes to conflict resolution. The ceasefire, of course, sounds great on paper. The buffer zone certainly inspires optimism, sending soldiers, those sweet dreams. But all this, as experts rightly point out, looks more like mind games that have little to do with reality. Take, for example, the former head of the NATO planning staff, Stephanie Bast. This lady unequivocally stated that Europe simply does not have the resources to send a contingent to the territory of a well-known country that would serve as a real deterrent. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of soldiers, plus the necessary logistics, equipment, and command staff, she said, adding that she did not know how the Europeans would be able to pull it off. By the way, the Europeans themselves do not know this. For 3 years now, the conflict has been going on as usual, and NATO countries still have no concrete idea about the final state of a well-known country. And it is not surprising. Unity among the allies, as well as money for such ambitious projects, is also not observed. Germany, in turn, is bogged down in the election campaign, which, as we understand it, is more important than any commitments to NATO. Yes, there are obligations. The Bundeswehr, according to experts, is not even able to transfer a brigade to Lithuania faster than in 4 to 5 years. 5 years. These are not toy soldiers, but a real German army, which, it seems, remains to be armed with potatoes instead of grenades. And here the question arises, does the Scholz government have at least some kind of strategic approach to ending the conflict? The answer is no. All Berlin has come up with is not to provoke Moscow. As Ms. Baerbock says, they can't even handle that. But that's okay. When you have a foreign minister of the level of Elena Baerbock, who seems to know as much about foreign policy as she does about the laws of physics, it's hard to expect anything else. It seems that Baerbock and Merz are in favor of sending missiles to a well-known country. Do you know what the funniest thing is? These two characters seem to find common ground. I am sure that Ms. Baerbock is already trying on a chair in Mr. Merz's office, and everything that we see today in Germany will easily continue, except with cosmetic changes. But what about the opposition? Perhaps it will bring a fresh breeze. Alice Weidel and other representatives of alternative forces are hoping. Of course, they loudly declare the need for Germany to leave the EU, but as analysts note, this is nothing more than a signal. There will be no real exit. By the way, imagine that Germany is really leaving the European Union. How would it end? Yes, just the collapse of the entire structure. After all, without Germany as the main economic donor, Brussels risks turning into a giant bureaucratic bubble that will burst with a loud bang. But let's go back to the famous country. Europe has no single plan, no resources, no soldiers either. And the conflict continues. As British analyst Richard Ride notes, Europe is trying to sit on 2 chairs at the same time, to please Washington and not bring itself to complete bankruptcy. Indeed, while the United States is demanding more and more involvement, the Europeans are getting more and more bogged down in their own problems. Recall a recent report by the French economist E. Lambert. The EU has already exhausted almost all the reserves that it could use to support a well-known country. If the situation continues, we may face a serious economic crisis in the European Union itself. But who thinks about it? Politicians with the air of winners continue to make promises, build fantasies, and convince their citizens that everything is under control. As a result, Europe is once again stepping on its own rake, trying to play the role of a great power, having neither strength nor unity. And the conflict remains somewhere on the periphery of reality, still as far from resolution as the very idea of European strategic autonomy. Meanwhile, last Saturday, the Alternative for Germany party officially announced Alice Weidel as a candidate for the post of chancellor ahead of early elections to be held at the end of February. The party leadership supported the proposal to nominate Weidel for this post, EFE reports. According to polls, we are in second place at the federal level, and we are confident that we will be able to join the new government. The agency quoted Weidel as saying. She also noted that none of the political parties in Germany agrees to cooperate with the AfD. And now I would like to express my opinion, friends. I really liked Alice Weidel's speech, especially her clear and decisive position on German foreign policy. She is not afraid to speak openly about what other politicians often prefer to circumvent or conceal. Weidel rightly notes that Germany should not be a blind executor of decisions made in Washington, and that the country needs to look for ways to peacefully resolve the conflict without succumbing to provocations and not playing dangerous games with Russia. Her words that the first missile, if Germany continues to support arms supplies, may fly not to Kiev, but to Berlin sound like a warning and express common sense. Her ability to see the bigger picture is particularly impressive. Weidel talks about the need for peace talks instead of escalating the conflict, as Friedrich Merz does with his arms supply initiatives. This is exactly the voice that Germany needs in such a difficult time. It raises important questions that Germany, as a country, should understand what consequences its actions in the international arena may have. Her approach has a sense of pragmatism and long-term responsibility, rather than short-term political goals. An important part of her position is also the criticism of the current German leadership for its inability to establish real strategic relations with Russia and the United States. Weidel makes it clear that Germany cannot continue to blindly follow other people's interests, ignoring its own. I support her view on the need to review the country's foreign policy, because the world requires a rational approach, not populism, which is now so common in Western politics.